Welcome to another edition of Focus on Alternatives, brought to you by ADISA, the Alternative and Direct Investment Securities Association. For more educational content like this, please check out the Resource Library tab on adisa.org. My name is Greg Moz. I'll be your host today, and I'm joined by Gloria Neeland. She's the CEO of TriLink. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to be talking impact investing and ESG, and kind of comparing them. So why don't you just start off by giving us the basic definitions?
Okay. Everybody might not agree with these definitions, but I'm going to try to make a nuanced subject simple, and that's not always easy. So ESG is really looking at how a company runs their company, so the policies and practices of the company. So E stands for environmental, S stands for social, G stands for governance. People typically think of governance because you go, well, sure, you want a company that's got audited financials, that has good controls.
Right.
But if you think about it, you also want a company that treats their employees fairly, that pays, fair wages, that has benefits for their employees, does training. So that's the social piece of it. From an environmental piece, I think everybody also thinks of that as, oh, they don't, pollute the soil if they are a manufacturing plant, or, they don't dump all their wastewater into rivers or whatever. But there's also lots of other ways to look at the environmental side of a company and how any company actually treats the environment, just in who they buy like if they buy supplies, who they buy from. Do they use recycled paper? There's lots of nuances to both, but ESG, to me, is pretty simple because it's just the policies and practices of the firm, how they run their company. Impact investing is where it gets a little more challenging because it really comes from the perspective of the investor. And you're making an investment with the intent to create some kind of positive impact in the community that you're investing in or in the world. And so you're investing in something with the intent to create positive impact. So a good example would be you're investing in a wastewater treatment plant. Oh, that has an obvious impact. Or you're investing in a company that, I'm trying to think of a really good one now, that provides clean water to underserved populations. Those are the easy ones. The ones that aren't as easy are, well, if you're making an investment in a small, mid-sized business that the business doesn't really have access to capital, but that company is going to have a lot of impact because they create jobs, they pay, higher wages, things like that. So you have to look at, are you making that investment with the intent to create impact? And can you create impact with that investment? And so, again, they're a little nuanced, but I do think they're different, and people talk about them as if they're the same.
Right, so thank you for walking us through that. I mean, I read about, different articles about ESG and impact investing, and they kind of align with what you're saying, but not necessarily always. Why is there a discrepancy there?
Yes. Well, I think that there are a group of investors who say, well, if I am holding companies accountable by looking at their policies and practices, and I'm paying attention, doing ESG screens, then that in and of itself is an impact investment because it is impactful, right? And so they call that an impact investment. And I look at it and go, well, sure, it is impactful, absolutely, because you want companies or investors to pay attention to what the companies are doing that they're investing in. But that isn't necessarily an impact investment, which again, it's a little nuanced. But if you think about, okay, what are the outcomes that you can measure from the impact that you're having? To me, that is more of an impact investment. And it's got to be measurable, tangible. Right? ESG investing, if you're investing in companies to influence their policies and practices, or you're investing in the ones that already are doing good things, well, you're not changing anything. That's not measurable. And again, it's impactful because you want to do that versus investing in bad companies.
Sure.
But it's not necessarily an impact investment.
So I like that. It's the intent to make an impact, and then how are you measuring that impact?
Yes.
So perfect. So practically, how do these both play out when making an investment, ESG and impact investing?
So it depends on how you're looking at it and if you're doing a public investment or a private investment. If you're doing a private investment, it's so much easier because you actually do have access to information. You can tell that company, if you don't give me that information, then you're not getting my money. So you do have a lot more influence when you are doing private investments. But I would say, the whole investment industry has gone a long way to get public companies to report on environmental, social, and governance kinds of policies and practices. And so from an ESG perspective, we would argue that you would first do a screen and say, okay, do I want to invest in this company? So what are their policies and practices? And can I even influence those policies and practices with my investment? And so that would be the ESG side of it. Then impact you would track over time.
Sure.
And you would do a baseline assessment and say, if I'm investing in this wastewater treatment plant, then I want to know how many tons of wastewater are being treated and turned into clean drinking water, for example. And there are metrics that you can use to then track and report that out over time.
Right. So let me throw another term in the mix here. So SRI, social responsible investing. How does that play into this? Because I've heard of SRI for like decades.
Forever,
yeah,
right?
yeah, but it's newer, the ESG. But so how does SRI fit into all this?
So SRI is socially responsible investing, and I would say it's not too different from ESG investing, except in its history. And so socially responsible investing has been around for a long time, and it originally started more as values-based negative screening. So I am not going to invest in these things, tobacco, firearms, alcohol, whatever things were your values. And that was a way to reflect your values in the way you invested. And so again, historically, socially responsible investing meant screening out. And then I would say probably in the last decade, maybe it's been shorter than that, but now socially responsible investors have started looking at it as, well, wait a minute, we can also use that as a positive screen and say, we're going to use those values to pick companies that meet my values. And so that's oversimplifying it, but it is really an easy way to think about it. SRI is more values-based, both negative and positive. And it could also be, what's the word they use? Like proactive, where you're using your investment to get some kind of a proxy out for a public company to change a behavior, right?
The activism investing.
Shareholder activism, thank you.
Yeah.
So I think that falls under the umbrella of socially responsible investing as well. But again, typically it's driven from a values perspective.
So I'm seeing that investors are more and more interested in ESG investing and impact investing. How do advisors, engage with clients on these topics?
That's a great question, and I think a lot of advisors, particularly ones that are part of ADISA, are asking themselves that same question, like, how do I engage? And I think the easiest way to do it is for the advisor to get educated themselves, to really understand the differences and the nuances, and then understand what investments are available, so that once they sit down and talk to a client about, what's important to you, what do you care about, and then they can look at, can I align this person's investment portfolio without giving up investment return?
Right.
Can I align what that person cares about, their causes, the things that are important to them with their investments, their traditional investments? And I think more and more it's easier because there are more companies that are paying attention to those things. And I personally imagine a world where investors all get together and say, okay, we're only going to invest in good companies, right? Ones that aren't doing bad things. And that's when everybody, realizes the power they have as an investor. If you think about getting everybody together and doing the same thing, then you go, wow, we could change the world. Because if you hold companies accountable to a certain behavior, then that's what's going to bring about change. But it is, I heard actually Michael Underhill this morning say it's an evolution, not a revolution. And I go, oh, I think that's true.
Yeah,
unfortunately, right?
Yeah.
I'd like it to be a revolution.
I appreciate that too. Gloria, thank you for walking us through these various nuances and these definitions. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching another episode of Focus on Alternatives. To view the rest of the series, please visit adisa.org. Thank you.